Well, I have an update. I actually had given up on this first Z80 board that I built because when I ran Altair 8K Basic, I would get some garbage characters. And so I figured I needed a revision on the board anyway, so I did some changes in the schematic and sent out for a new PCB. While I was waiting for it, I decided, okay, let me take a look at the board and see if there's any more hardware hacking I can do on it to get it to work in the meantime. And what I found was a couple loose pins on the Z80 chip. Now, I had some trouble in the soldering of the chip. The chip, though I placed it really well on the board, must have shifted slightly when I carried it downstairs to the reflow oven. And so the pins were offset a little bit. And so one row of pins didn't solder well, and I had to take a soldering iron to them initially to get them soldered better. Well, I must have missed a few pins. So I resoldered a couple pins. And after that, most of the garbage characters went away. And then I decided, well, I still have some garbage characters. Let me debug this rationally. And so I wrote some code that runs on the Z80 and some code that runs on my Mac just to exercise the serial port with various little tests. And what I found was the Z80 was detecting frame errors on serial into it. Framing errors could indicate a mismatch in the baud rate. Now, I maybe stupidly thought I could divide down an exactly 16 megahertz clock to a decent baud rate, and of course it's not going to be exact, but on my 2560 board it also has a 16 megahertz clock that's being divided down for a baud rate, and it has clean transfer. So it could be something about that. Maybe the UART, the Z80 SIO, is not very tolerant of mismatches of speed. Or it could just be some noise that is causing the framing errors. But they are framing errors. So I came up with a hack way in software for now to avoid the framing errors. And basically, when I do a bulk transfer, like if I'm just typing text, it's no problem. But if I'm transferring with my cassette tape emulation, so I'm transferring bulk binary data, I basically have to reset the serial port every n bytes. And if I do that, then I avoid the framing errors. That's a hack. And I'm hoping when I get the new board in and get that put together really well, I'll have a better idea about, if I still have framing errors, how to hunt down what the cause is. I could always put in there's a 14 megahertz, 14 point something megahertz crystal that divides to baud rates exactly. And I could put that in instead of running at 16 megahertz. The problem with that is I can't find one that has the same footprint. I looked on Mouser. I would like to find one that has the same footprint as my 16 megahertz crystal so I don't have to do another board rev. But if worse comes to worse, I'll do another board rev. That's a little expensive, but it's something to try. Anyways, all that aside, I do have BASIC working on an actual physical Z80. So this is no more any emulators. This is for real. This is Altair BASIC on a Z80. And I have loaded up here a little program that's going to be the beginning of, if you look at the line 10, My Space Game, which is the beginning of a re-implementation of a little text animated space game that I did in 1976. And if I run it, this is just to give you an idea, you actually can. That's supposed to be my spaceship. And right now it's just hovering. But you actually can do decent text animation with 8K Basic. Now, this is a 16 megahertz processor. And I found that I was trying all kinds of high baud rates, but I found that Basic itself has a speed that it will go, right? So even though it's a 16 megahertz processor, if you tried to paint the whole screen, like to do an animation where you just update the whole TTY screen, you'd see it being painted. So it showed that there was no reason to run higher than 9600 baud, because as I tried it, the speed of the repainting didn't get any better if I went higher than 9600 baud. So I'm running at 9600 baud, and instead of doing an animation where I position my elements in a matrix and just paint the matrix out for each frame, I am using cursor controls. So if you look at this, I've got a subroutine to position my so-called spaceship at XY, and what it does is uses a cursor control to position the cursor at X, the old X and Y, and erases the ship, and then another cursor positioning to position at XY and print the ship. The Z80 board is doing console I/O to a serial port, which is an onboard SIO chip, so it's going to port A. Those serial lines are hooked to a serial to USB chip. Then the board is connected by USB to a Mac. From the Mac, inside of a normal Mac terminal window, I wrote a terminal emulator that's tailored to Altair 8K Basic. And that terminal emulator opens up the serial port and does the go-between for passing characters back and forth. While it's doing that, it's doing some nice things for me, like inverting the sense of the shift key when I want it inverted so that I don't have to keep typing caps lock and forgetting caps lock on. But it has these little control codes that put the terminal emulator into other modes, and two of the modes deal with pretending to be a tape. So when I do a C save or a C load, I type a control character that the terminal emulator recognizes, and it channels binary data either from the Z80 or to the Z80, and the Z80 end has a C load or a C save running. Okay, so it's slow, but so are cassette tape. Dealing with cassette tapes, that was slow. They were only 300 baud, and I'm running at 300 baud because I found if I go too fast, it's not a question of noise on a line, it's a question that Basic itself is not fast enough to take binary data, like let's say at 9600 baud. So I limit myself to a 300 baud transfer rate, and I have to do some stuff to avoid the framing errors, and so it's slow. But so was dealing with cassette tapes. And I still get an occasional bad byte, and that also was possible with cassette tapes, that you would get bad loads. So the thing is that Basic is pretty tolerant of getting bad binary data just dumped into its program memory. But at some point, it might mess up Basic if it's too egregious. And it really became a pain to have to keep unplugging the non-volatile RAM chip, put it in the programming board, and reprogram Basic, and then put the chip back, and then repower up the Z80. So I came up with my reason for only running in 32K on the Basic is the upper 32K contains an uninitialized copy of 8K Basic. So when I create the load file for the programmer to program the chip, the load file is 64K long, contains 2 copies of Basic. The first 32K bytes is what's going to get run, and the second 32K bytes is there for safekeeping. And I hijack Basic's hard reset. So I alter what it programs for the location 0 reset to just copy the saved copy over into the lower 32K so that I do a clean restart of Basic from the beginning. So now, right now, if I press my reset button, which you can't see, but I'll do, it brings me back to the uninitialized Basic where you have to answer these questions. And now we're back at having a freshly initialized Basic. So if I trash Basic, if I trash the lower 32K in some way, is so long as page 0 is not terribly trashed and the reset vector works. And so long as my reset routine, which does the copy, isn't terribly trashed, I will be able to restart and not have to go all the way back to the non-volatile RAM programmer board. So I feel like I've accomplished my task. My task was to get any kind of Basic running on my Z80 board, preferably a vintage Basic, and I got Altair 8K Basic running reasonably, and I'm already writing programs for it that are useful to me, and so I am happy. Now, there's a thing about why am I not just running in an emulator? Well, emulators have their place, but it's not the ultimate for my board. You know, my board will be able to do much more than an emulator could do. So the emulator would be fine to run Basic, because Basic is really just a text thing. It's just a TTY program. But if you want Basic to interact with real hardware devices, you would have to get into extending emulators to emulate real hardware devices. I have an SD card interface on my Z80 board, and I plan to write whatever little bit of code I need to write to get that card working so that I can do just a little more hacking on Basic so that when it does a C save and a C load, it's using the onboard SD card instead of going over the serial line. And so that'll be something that they didn't envision back in 1975, that 8K Basic would save to an SD card. Okay, that's it. I intended that to be a quick update, but this may be longer than a quick update. But thank you for listening.